Hello and welcome. The following is a reading from Tacitus, the Roman historian and politician, born in 56 AD. It's titled A Treatise on the Situation, Manners, and Inhabitants of Germany. If you like this kind of content, like and subscribe, and we can begin. From the works of Tacitus. Germany is separated from Gaul, Raetia, and Pannonia by the rivers Rhine and Danube, from Sarmatia and Dacia by mountains and mutual dread. The rest is surrounded by an ocean, embracing broad promontories and vast insular tracts, in which our military expeditions have lately discovered various nations and kingdoms. The Rhine, issuing from the inaccessible and precipitous summit of the Rhaetic Alps, bends gently to the west and falls into the northern ocean. The Danube, poured from the easy and gently raised ridge of Mount Abnoba, visits several nations in its course, till at length it bursts out by 6 channels into the Pontic Sea. A 7th is lost in marshes. The people of Germany appear to me indigenous and free from intermixture with foreigners, either as settlers or casual visitants. For the emigrants of the former ages performed their expeditions not by land but by water, and that immense and, if I may so call it, hostile ocean is rarely navigated by ships from our world. Then, besides the great danger of a boisterous and unknown sea, who would relinquish Asia, Africa, or Italy for Germany, a land rude in its surface and rigorous in its climate, cheerless to every beholder and cultivator, except a native? In their ancient songs, which are the only records or annals, they celebrate the god Tuisto, sprung from the earth, and his son Manus as the fathers and founders of their race. To Manus they ascribe 3 sons, from whose names the people bordering on the ocean are called Ignaevones, those inhabiting the central parts, Herminomes, the rest, and Istaevones. Some, however, assuming the license of antiquity, affirm that there were more descendants of the god, and whom more appellations were derived, and those of the Marsi, Gambrivi, Suevi, and Vandali, and all of these are genuine and original names. That of Germany, on the other hand, they assert to be a modern addition, for that the people who first crossed the Rhine and expelled the Gauls are now called the Tungri, were then named Germans, which appellations of a particular tribe, not of a whole people, gradually prevailed, so that the title of Germans, first assumed by the victors in order to excite terror, was afterwards adopted by the nation in general. They have likewise the tradition of Hercules of their country, whose praises they sing before those of all other heroes as they advance to battle. A peculiar kind of verse is also current among them, by the recital of which, termed barding, they stimulate their courage, while the sound itself serves as an augury of the event of impending combat. For, according to the nature of the cry proceeding from the line, terror is inspired or felt, nor does it seem so much an articulate song as the wild chorus of valor. A harsh, piercing note and a broken roar are the favorite tones, which they render more full and sonorous by applying their mouths to their shields. Some conjecture that Ulysses, in the course of his long and fabulous wanderings, was driven into this ocean, and landed in Germany, and that, Absiburgium, a place situated on the Rhine, and at this day inhabited, was founded by him, and named Ascipurgion. They pretend that an altar was formerly discovered there, consecrated to Ulysses, with the name of his father Laertes subjoined, and that certain monuments and tombs inscribed with Greek characters, 30, are still extant upon the confines of Germany and Rhaetia. These allegations I shall neither attempt to confirm nor to refute. Let everyone believe concerning them as he is disposed. I concur in opinion with those who deem the Germans never to have intermarried with other nations, but to be a pure, unmixed race, and stamped with a distinct character. Hence a family of likeness pervades the whole, though their numbers are so great, eyes stern and blue, ruddy hair and large bodies, powerful in sudden exertions, but impatient of toil and labour, least of all capable of sustaining thirst and heat. Cold and hunger they are accustomed by their climate and soil to endure. The land, though varied to a considerable extent in its aspects, is yet universally shagged with forests or deformed by marshes, moister on the side of Gaul, more bleak on the side of Noreum and Pannonia. It is productive of grain, but unkindly to fruit trees. It abounds in flocks and herds, but in general of a small breed. Even the beeve kind are destitute in their usual steadiness and dignity of their head. They are, however, numerous, and form the most esteemed and indeed the only species of wealth. Silver and gold the gods, I know not whether in their favour or anger, have denied this country. Not that I would assert that no veins of these metals are generated in Germany, for who has actually made the search? The possession of them is not coveted by these people as it is by us. Vessels of silver are indeed to be seen among them, which have been presented to their ambassadors and chiefs, but they are held in no higher esteem than earthenware. The borderers, however, set a value on gold and silver for the purpose of commerce, and have learned to distinguish several kinds of our coin, some of which they prefer to others. The remoter inhabitants continue the more simple and ancient usage of bartering commodities. The money preferred by the Germans is the old and well-known species, such as the serati and bigati. They are also better pleased with silver than gold, not on account for any likeness of that metal, but because the smaller money is more convenient in their common and petty merchandise. Even iron is not plentiful among them, as may be inferred by the nature of their weapons. Swords or broad lances are seldom used, but they generally carry a spear, called in their language framea, which has an iron blade, short and narrow, but so sharp and manageable that, as occasion requires, they employ it either in close or distant fighting. This spear and a shield are all the armor of the cavalry. The foot have, besides, missile weapons, several to each man, which they hurl to an immense distance. They are either naked or lightly covered with a small mantle, and have no pride in equipage. Their shields are only ornamented with the choicest colours. Few are provided with a coat of mail, and scarcely here and there is one with a casque or helmet. Their horses are neither remarkable for beauty nor swiftness, nor are they fraught with the various evolutions practised with us. The cavalry is either bear down straight forwards, or wheel at once to the right, in so compact a body that none is left behind the rest. Their principal strength, on the whole, consists in their infantry. Hence, in an engagement these are intermixed with the cavalry. So well accordant with the nature of equestrian combats is the agility of these foot soldiers, whom they select from the whole body of their youth, and place at the front of the line. Their number, too, is determined 100 from each canton, and they are distinguished at home by a name expressive of this circumstance, so that what at first was only an appellation of number becomes thenceforth a title of honor. Their line of battle is disposed in wedges. To give ground, provided they rally again, is considered rather a prudent stratagem than cowardice. They carry off their slain, even while the battle remains undecided. The greatest disgrace that can befall them is to have abandoned their shields. A person branded with this ignominy is not permitted to join in their religious rites or enter their assemblies, so that many, after escaping from battle, have put an end to their infamy by the halter. In the election of kings they have regard to birth, in that of generals to valor. Their kings have not an absolute or unlimited power, and their generals command less through the force of authority than of example. If they are daring, adventurous, and conspicuous in action, they procure obedience from the admiration they inspire. None, however, but the priests are permitted to judge offenders, to inflict bonds or stripes, so that chastisement appears not as an act of military discipline, but as the instigation of the god whom they suppose present with warriors. They also carry with them to battle certain images and standards taken from the sacred groves. It is a principal incentive to their courage that their squadrons and battalions are not formed by men fortuitously collected, but by the assemblages of families and clans. Their pledges are also near at hand. They have within hearing the yells of their women and the cries of their children. These, too, are the most revered witnesses of each man's conduct, that these most liberal applauders. To their mothers and their wives they bring their wounds for relief, nor do these dread to count or search out the gashes. The women also administer food and encouragement to those who are fighting. Tradition relates that armies beginning to give way what have been rallied by the females, though the earnestness of their supplications, the interposition of their bodies, and the pictures they have drawn of impending slavery, a calamity which these people bear with more impatience for their women than themselves, so that those states who have been obliged to give among their hostages the daughters of noble families are the most effectually bound to fidelity. They even suppose somewhat of sanctity and prescience to be inherent in the female sex, and therefore neither despise their counsels nor disregard their responses. We have beheld, in the reign of Vespasian, Veleda, long reverenced by many as a deity. Orima, moreover, and several others were formerly held in equal veneration, but not with a servile flattery, nor as though they had made them goddesses. Of the gods, Mercury is the principal object of their adoration, whom on certain days they think it lawful to propitiate even with human victims. To Hercules and Mars they offer the animals usually allotted for sacrifice. Some of the Suevi also perform sacred rites to Isis. What was the cause and origin of this foreign worship, I've not been able to discover. Further than that, her being represented with the symbol of a galley seems to indicate imported religion. They conceive it unworthy the grandeur of celestial beings to confine their deities within walls, or to represent them under human similitude. Woods and groves are their temples, and they affix names of divinity to that secret power, which they behold with their eye of adoration alone. No people are more addicted to divination by omens and lots. The latter is performed in the simple manner following. They cut a twig from a fruit tree, divide it into small pieces, which, distinguished by certain marks, are thrown promiscuously upon a white garment. Then the priest of the canton, if the occasion be public, if private, the master of the family, after an invocation of the gods, with his eyes lifted to heaven, thrice takes out each piece, and as they come up, interprets their signification according to the marks fixed upon them. If the result prove unfavorable, there is no more consultation on the same affair that day. If propitious, a confirmation by the omens is still required. In common with other nations, the Germans are acquainted with the practice of auguring from the notes of flights of birds, but it is peculiar to them to derive admonitions and presages from horses also. Certain of these animals, milk white and untouched by earthly labor, are pastured at the public expense in the sacred woods and groves. These, yoked to a consecrated chariot, are accompanied by the priest and king, or chief person of the community, who attentively observe their manner of neighing and snorting, and no kind of augury is more credited, not only among the populace, but among the nobles and priests, for the latter is consider themselves as the ministers of the gods, and the horses as privy to divine will. Another kind of divination, by which they explore the event of momentous wars, is to oblige a prisoner, taken by any means whatsoever from the nation with whom they are at variance, to fight with a picked man of their own, each with his own country's arms, and accordingly as the victory falls, they presage success to one or another party. On affairs of smaller moment, the chiefs consult; on those of greater importance, the whole community. Yet with his circumstance, it is what is referred to as the decision of the people is first maturely discussed by the chiefs. They assemble, unless upon some sudden emergency on stated days, either at the new or full moon, which they account as the most auspicious season for the beginning of any enterprise. Nor do they, in their computation of time, reckon, like us, by the number of days, but of nights. In this way they arrange their business. In this way they fix their appointments, so that with them the night seems to lead the day. An inconvenience produced by their liberty is that they do not all assemble at a stated time, as if it were in obedience to a command, but 2 or 3 days are lost in the delays of convening. When they all think fit, they sit down armed. Silence is proclaimed by the priests, who have on this occasion a coercive power. And then the king, or chief, and such others are conspicuous for age, birth, military renown, or eloquence are heard, and gain attention rather from their ability to persuade than their authority to command. If a proposal displeases, the assembly reject it by an inarticulate murmur. If it proves to be agreeable, they clash their javelins. For the most honourable expression of assent among them is the sound of arms. Before this council, it is likewise allowed to exhibit accusations and to prosecute capital offences. Punishments varied according to the nature of the crime. Traitors and deserters are hung upon trees. Cowards, dastards, and those guilty of unnatural practices are suffocated in mud under a hurdle. This difference of punishment has in view the principle that villainy should be exposed while it is punished, but turpitude concealed. The penalties annexed to slighter offences are also proportioned to the delinquency. The convicts are fined in horses and cattle. Part of the mulct goes to the king or state, part of the injured person or his relations. In the same assemblies, chiefs are also elected to administer justice through the cantons and districts. 100 companions, chosen from the authority of the people, attend upon each to them, to assist them as well as with their advice as their authority. The Germans transact no business, public or private, without being armed, but it is not customary for any person to assume arms until the state has approved his ability to use them. Then, in the midst of the assembly, either one of the chiefs or the father or a relation equips the youth with a shield and javelin. These are to them the manly gown. This is the first honour conferred upon youth. Before this, they are considered as part of the household. Afterwards, of the state. The dignity of chieftain is bestowed even on mere lads, whose descent is eminently illustrious, or whose fathers have performed signal services to the public. They are associated, however, with those of mature strength who have already been declared capable of service, nor do they blush to be seen in the rank of companions. For the state of companionship itself has its several degrees, determined by the judgment of him whom they follow, and there is a great emulation among the companions which shall possess the highest place in the valour of their chief, and among the chiefs which shall excel in the number and valour of his companions. It is their dignity, their strength, to be always surrounded with a large body of select youth, an ornament in peace, a bulwark in war, and not in his own country alone, but among the neighbouring states. The fame and glory of each chief consists in being distinguished for the number and bravery of his companions. Such chiefs are courted by embassies, distinguished by presents, and often by their reputation alone decide a war. In the field of battle, it is disgraceful for the chief to be surpassed in valour. It is disgraceful for the companions not to equal their chief, but it is reproach and infamy during a whole succeeding life to retreat from the field surviving him. To aid, to protect him, to place him in their own gallant actions to the account of his glory, is their first and most sacred engagement. The chiefs fight for victory. The companions fight for their chief. If their native country be long sunk in peace and in action, many of the young nobles repair to some other state than engaged in war. For besides that repose is unwelcome to their race, and toils and perils afford them a better opportunity of distinguishing themselves, they are unable without war and violence to maintain a large train of followers. The companion requires from the liberality of his chief the warlike steed, the bloody and conquering spear. and in place of pay, he expects to be supplied with a table, homely, indeed, but plentiful. The funds for this munificence must be found in war and rapine, nor are they so easily persuaded to cultivate the earth and await the produce of the seasons as to challenge the foe and expose themselves to wounds. Nay, they even think it base and spiritless to earn by sweat what they might purchase with blood. During the intervals of war, they pass their time less in hunting than in a sluggish repose divided between sleep and the table. All the bravest of the warriors, committing the care of the house, the family affairs, and the lands to the women, the old men, the weaker part of domestics, stupefy themselves into action. So wonderful is the contrast presented by nature, that the same persons love indolence and hate tranquility. It is customary, then, for several states to present by voluntary and individual contributions cattle or grain to their chiefs, which are accepted as honorary gifts, while they serve as necessary supplies. They are peculiarly pleased with the presents from neighboring nations, offered not only by individuals but by the community at large, such as fine horses, heavy armor, rich housings, and gold chains. We have now taught them also to accept of money. It is well known that none of the German nations inhabit cities, or even admit of contiguous settlements. They dwell scattered and separate, as a spring, a meadow, or a grove may chance to invite them. Their villages are laid out, not like ours in rows of adjoining buildings, but everyone surrounds his house with a vacant space, either way by security against fire or through ignorance of the art of building. For indeed they are unacquainted with the use of mortar and tiles, and for every purpose employ rude, unshapen timber fashioned with no regards to pleasing the eye. They bestow more than the ordinary pains in coating certain parts of their buildings with a kind of earth, so pure and shining that it gives the appearance of a painting. They also dig subterraneous caves, and cover them over with a great quantity of dung. These they use as winter retreats and granaries, for they preserve a moderate temperature, and upon an invasion, when the open country is plundered, these recesses remain unviolated, either because the enemy is ignorant of them, or because he will not trouble himself with the search. The clothing common to all is a sagum, fastened by a clasp, or, in want of that, a thorn. With no other covering, they pass whole days on the hearth before the fire. The more wealthy and distinguished by a vest, not flowing loose, like those of the Sarmatians and Parthians, but girt close, and exhibiting the shape of every limb. They also wear the skins of beasts, which the people near the borders are less curious in selecting or preparing than more remote inhabitants who cannot by commerce procure other clothing. These make choice of particular skins, which they variegate with spots and strips of the furs of marine animals, the produce of the exterior ocean and seas to us unknown. The dress of the women does not differ from that of the men, except that they more frequently wear linen, which they stain with purple, and do not lengthen their upper garment into sleeves, but leave exposed the whole arm and part of the breast. The matrimonial bond is, nevertheless, strict and severe among them, nor is there anything in their manners more commendable than this. Almost singly among the barbarians, they content themselves with one wife, a very few of them excepted, who, not through incontinence, but because their alliance is solicited on account of their rank, practice polygamy. The wife does not bring a dowry to her husband, but receives one from him. The parents and relations assemble, and pass their approbation on the presents not adapted to please a female taste, to decorate the bride, but oxen, a caparisoned steed, a shield, spear, and sword. By virtue of these the wife is espoused, and she in her turn makes present some arms to her husband. This they consider as the firmest bond of union. These, the sacred mysteries, the conjugal deities. That the woman may not think herself excused from exertions of fortitude, or exempt from the casualties of war, she is admonished by the very ceremonial of her marriage that she comes to her husband as a partner in toils and dangers, to suffer and to dare equally with him in peace and war. This is indicated by the yoked oxen, the harnessed steed, the offered arms. Thus she is to live, thus to die. She receives what she is to return inviolate, and honor to her children, what her daughters-in-law are to receive, and again transmit to her grandchildren. They live, therefore, fenced around with chastity, corrupted by no seductive spectacles, no convivial incitements. Men and women are alike acquainted with clandestine correspondence. Adultery is extremely rare among so numerous a people. Its punishment is instant, and the pleasure of the husband. He cuts off the hair of the offender, strips her in the presence of her relations, expels her from the house, and pursues her with stripes through the whole village. Nor is any indulgence shown to the prostitute. Neither beauty, youth, nor riches can procure her a husband, for none there looks on vice with a smile, or calls mutual seduction the way of the world. Still more exemplary is the practice of those states in which none but virgins marry, and the expectations and wishes of the wife are at once brought to a period. Thus, they take one husband as one body and one life, that no thought, no desire may extend beyond him, and that he may be loved not only as their husband, but as their marriage, to limit their increase of children, or put to death any of their later progeny, is accounted infamous, and good habits have there more influence than good laws elsewhere. In every house, the children grow up thinly and meanly clad, to that the bulk of the body and limb which we behold with wonder. Every mother suckles her own children, and does not deliver them into the hands of servants or nurses. No indulgence distinguishes the young master from the slave. They lie together amidst the same cattle, upon the same ground, till age separates and valor marks out the free-born. The youths partake late of the pleasures of love, and hence pass the age of puberty unexhausted. Nor are the virgins hurried into marriage. The same maturity, the same full growth is required. The sexes unite equally matched and robust, and the children inherit the vigor of their parents. Children are regarded with equal affection by their maternal uncles as by their fathers. Some even consider this as a more sacred bond of consanguinity, and prefer the requisition of hostages, as if it held by the mind of the firmer tie, and the family by a more extensive obligation. A person's own children, however, are his heirs and successors, and no wills are made. If there be no children, the next in order of inheritance are the brothers, paternal and maternal uncles. The more numerous are a man's relations and kinsmen, the more comfortable is his old age, nor is it here any advantage to be childless. It is an indispensable duty to adopt the enmities of a father or relation, as well as their friendships. These, however, are not irreconcilable or perpetual. Even homicide is atoned by a certain fine in cattle and sheep, and the whole family accepts the satisfaction, to the advantage of the public weal, since quarrels are most dangerous in a free state. No people are more addicted to social entertainments or more liberal in the exercise of hospitality. To refuse any person whatever admittance under their roof is accounted flagitious. Everyone according to how his ability feasts his guest. When his provisions are exhausted, he who was late to the host is now the guide and the companion to another hospitable board. They enter the next house uninvited, and are received with equal cordiality. No one makes a distinction with respect to the rights of hospitality between a stranger and an acquaintance. The departing guest is presented with whatever he may ask for, and with the same freedom a wish is desired in return. They are pleased with presents, but think no obligation incurred either when they give or receive. Their manner of living with their guests is easy and affable. As soon as they arise from sleep, which they generally protract till late in the day, they bathe usually in warm water, as cold weather chiefly prevails this. After bathing, they take their meal, each on a distinct seat and a separate table. They then proceed, armed, to business, and not less frequently to convivial parties in which it is no disgrace to pass days and nights without intermission in drinking. The frequent quarrels that arise among them, when intoxicated, seldom terminate in abusive language, but more frequently in blood. In their feasts, they generally deliberate on the reconcilement of enemies, on family alliances, on the appointment of chiefs, and finally on peace and war, conceiving that no time the soul is more open to sincere or warmed to heroism. These people naturally void the artifice or disguise, disclose most of the secret emotions in their hearts in their freedom of festivity. The minds of all being thus displayed without reserve, the subjects of their deliberation are against canvas the next day, and each time it is advantageous. They consult when unable to dissemble. They determine when not liable to mistake. Their drink is a liquor prepared from barley or wheat, brought by the fermentation by a certain resemblance of wine. Those who border on the Rhine also purchase it. Their food is simple: wild fruits, fresh venison, or coagulated milk. They satisfy hunger without seeking the elegances or delicacies of the table. Their thirst for liquor is not quenched with equal moderation. If their propensity to drunkenness be gratified to the extent of their wishes, intemperance proves as effectual in subduing them as the force of arms. They have only one kind of public spectacle, which is exhibited in every company. Young men who make it their diversion dance naked amidst drawn swords and presented spears. Practice has conferred skill at this exercise, and skill has given grace, but they do not exhibit for hire or gain. They only reward for this pastime, though a habit hazardous one is the pleasure of the spectators. What is extraordinary, they play at dice when sober, as a serious business, and that with such a desperate venture of gain or loss that when everything else is gone, they set their liberties and persons on the last throw. The loser goes into voluntary servitude, and though the youngest and strongest patiently suffers himself to be bound and sold, such is their obstinacy in bad practice, they themselves call it honor. The slaves thus acquired are exchanged away in commerce, and the winner may get rid of the scandal of his victory. The rest of their slaves have not, like ours, particular employments in the family allotted to them. Each is the master of a habitation and a household of his own. The lord requires from him a certain quantity of grain, cattle, or cloth, as from a tenant, and so far only the subjection of the slave extends. His domestic offices are performed by his own wife and children. It is usual to scourge a slave, or punish him with chains or hard labor. They are sometimes killed by their masters, not through severity of chastisement, but in the heat of passion, like an enemy, with this difference that is done with impunity. Freedmen are little superior to slaves, seldom filling any important office in the family, never in the state, except in those tribes which are under a regal government. There they rise above the free-born, and even the nobles in the rest, the subordinate condition of the freed men is proof of freedom. Lending money upon interest, and increasing it by usury, is unknown amongst them, and this ignorance more effectively prevents the practice than a prohibition would ever do. The lands are occupied by townships, in allotments proportional to the number of cultivators, and are afterwards parcelled out among the individuals of the district, in shares according to the rank and condition of each person. The wide extent of plain facilitates this partition. The arable lands are annually changed, and a part left fallow, nor do they attempt to make the most of the fertility and plenty of the soil by their own industry in planting orchards, enclosing meadows and watering gardens. Corn is the only product required from the earth. Hence their year is not divided into so many seasons as ours is. For, while they know and distinguish by name winter, spring, and summer, they are unacquainted equally with the appellation and bounty of autumn. Their funerals are without parade. The only circumstance to which they attend is to burn the bodies of eminent persons with some particular kinds of wood. Neither vestments nor perfumes are heaped upon the pile. The arms of the deceased, and sometimes his horse, are given to the flames. The tomb is a mound of turf. They contemn the elaborate and costly honors of monumental structures as mere burdens to the dead. They soon dismiss tears and lamentations, slowly, sorrow and regret. They think it the woman's part to bewail their friends, and the men's part to remember them. This is the sum of which I have been able to learn concerning the origin and manners of the Germans in general. But I now proceed to mention those particulars in which they differ from each other, and likewise to relate what nations have migrated from Germany into Gaul. The great writer, the deified Julius, asserts that the Gauls were formerly the superior people, whence it is probable that some Gallic colonies passed over into Germany, for how small an obstacle would a river be to prevent any nation as it increased in strength from occupying or changing the settlements as yet lying in common and unappropriated by the power of monarchies. Accordingly, the tract betwixt the Hercynian forest and the rivers Rhine and Main was pressed by the Helvetii, and that beyond by the Boii, both Gallic tribes. The name of Boiemum still remains, a memorial of the ancient settlement, though its inhabitants are now changed. But whether the Aravisci migrated into Pannonia from the Osi, a German nation, or the Osi into Germany from the Aravisci, the language, institutions, and manners of both being still the same, is a matter of uncertainty, for in their pristine state of equal indigence and equal liberty, the same advantages and disadvantages were common to both sides of the river. The Treveri and Nervi are ambitious of being thought of German origin, as if the reputation of this descent would distinguish them from Gauls, whom they resemble in person and effeminacy. The Vangiones, Triboci, and Nemetes, who inhabit the bank of the Rhine, are without doubt German tribes. Nor do the Ubi, although they have been thought worthy of being made a Roman colony, and are pleased at bearing the name of Agrippinenses from their founder, blush to acknowledge their origin from Germany, from whence they formerly migrated, and for their approved fidelity were settled on the bank of the Rhine, nor that they might be guarded themselves, that they might serve as a guard against the invaders. Of all these people, the most famed for their valor are the Batavi, whose territories comprise a small part of the banks of the Rhine, but consist chiefly of an island within it. These were formerly a tribe of the Catti, who, on account of an intestine division, removed to their present settlements in order to become a part of the Roman Empire. They still retain this honor, together with a memorial of their ancient alliance, for they are neither insulted by taxes nor oppressed by farmers of the revenue. Exempt from fiscal burdens and extraordinary contributions, and kept away from military use alone, they are reserved, like a magazine of arms, for the purchasers of war. The nation of the Mattiaci is under the degree of subjugation of the same kind, for the greatness of the Roman people has carried a reverence for the empire beyond the Rhine and the ancient limits. The Mattiaci, therefore, though occupying a small settlement and borders on the opposite side of the river, from sentiment and attachment act with us, resembling the Batavi in every respect, except that they are animated with a more vigorous spirit by the soil and air of their own country. I do not reckon among the people of Germany that those who occupy the Decumate lands, although inhabiting between the Rhine and Danube, some of the most fickle of the Gauls, rendered daring through indigence, seized upon this district of uncertain property. Afterwards, our boundary line being advanced, and a chain of fortified posts established, it became a skirt of the empire, and part of a Roman province. Beyond these dwell the Catti, whose settlements beginning from the Hercynian forest are in a tract of country less open and marshy than those which overspread the other states of Germany, for it consists of a continued range of hills, which gradually become more scattered, and the Hercynian forest both accompanies and leaves behind its Catti. This nation is distinguished by hardier frames, compactness of limb, fierceness of countenance, and a superior vigor of mind. For Germans, they have a considerable share of understanding and sagacity, for they chose able persons to command, and obey them when chosen, keep their ranks, seize opportunities, restrain impetuous motions, distribute property, the business of the day, properly rather, the business of the day, entrench themselves against the night, account fortune dubious and valor only certain, and what is extremely rare, and only a consequence of discipline, depend more on the general than the army. Their force consists entirely of infantry, who, beside their arms, are obliged to carry tools and provisions. Other nations appear to go to a battle, the Catti to war. Excursions and casual encounters are rare among them. It is indeed peculiar to cavalry soon to obtain, and soon to yield the victory. Speed borders upon timidity. Slow movements are more akin to steady valor. A custom followed by other German nations, only by a few individuals, however, of more daring spirit than the rest, is adopted by general consent among the Catti. From the time they arrive at the years of maturity, they let their hair and beard grow, and do not divest themselves of this votive badge, the promise of valor, till they have slain an enemy. Over blood and spoil they unveil the countenance, and proclaim that they have at length paid the debt of existence, and have proved themselves worthy of their country and parents. The cowardly and effeminate continue in their squalid disguise. The bravest among them wear also an iron ring, as a kind of chain, a mark of ignominy among that nation, till they have released themselves by the slaughter of a foe. Many of the Catti assume this distinction, and grow hoary under the mark, conspicuous both to foes and friends. By these, in every engagement, the attack is begun. They compose the front line, presenting a new spectacle of terror. Even in peace, they do not relax the sternness of their aspect. They have no house, no land, or domestic cares. They are maintained by whomsoever they visit, lavish of another's property, regardless of their own, till the debility of age renders them unequal to such a rigid course of military virtue. Next to the Catti, on the banks of the Rhine, where we now settled in its channel, it has become a sufficient boundary, dwell the Usipi and Tencteri. The latter people, in addition to the usual military reputation, are famed for their discipline in their cavalry. Nor is the infantry of the Catti in higher estimation than the horse of the Tencteri. Their ancestors established it, and are imitated by posterity. Horsemanship is the sport of their children, to the point of emulating their youth, and the exercise in which they persevere to old age. Horses are bequeathed along with the domestics, the household gods, and the rights of inheritance. They do not, however, like other things, go to the eldest son, but to the bravest and the most warlike. Contiguous to the Tencteri were formerly the Bructeri, but report now says that the Chamavi and Angrivari migrating into their country have expelled and entirely extirpated them. With the concurrence of the neighboring nations, induced either by hatred of their arrogance, love of plunder, or the favor of the gods towards the Romans, for they even gratified us with the spectacle of battle, in which above 60,000 Germans were slain, not by Roman arms, but what was still grander, by mutual hostilities, as if it were for the pleasure of our entertainment. Many of the nations retain and perpetuate, if not an affection for us, at least an animosity against each other. Since while the fate of an empire is thus urgent, fortune can bestow no higher benefit upon us than the discord of our enemies. Contiguous to the Angrivari and Chimari, backwards lie the Dulgibini and Chaussari, and other nations less known. In front, the Frisi succeed, who are distinguished by the appellations of the greater and lesser from their proportional power. The settlements of both stretch along the border of the Rhine and the ocean, and include, besides, vast lakes, which have been navigated by Roman fleets already. We have even explored the ocean itself on that side, and fame reports that columns of Hercules are still remaining on that coast. Whether it be that Hercules was ever there in reality, or that whatever great and magnificent is anywhere met with is, by common consent, ascribed to its renowned name. The attempt of Drusus Germanicus to make discoveries in this part was significantly daring, but the ocean opposed any further inquiry into itself and Hercules. After a while, no one renewed the attempt, and it was thought more pious and reverential to believe that the actions of the gods were true, rather than to bother investigating them. Hitherto we have traced the western side of Germany. It turns from thence with a vast sweep to the north, and first occurs the country of the Chauci, which, though it begins immediately from Frisia and occupies part of the seashore, yet stretches so far to border on all nations before mentioned, till it winds round so as to meet the territories of the Catti. This immense tract is not only possessed, but filled by the Chauci, a people the noblest of the Germans, who chose to maintain their greatness by justice rather than violence. Without ambition, without ungoverned desires, quiet and retired, they provoke no wars. They are guilty of no rapine or plunder, and it is a principal proof of their power and bravery that the superiority they possess has not been acquired by any unjust means. Yet all have arms in readiness, and, if necessary, an army is soon raised, for they abound in men and horses, and maintain their military reputation even in inaction. Bordering on the Chauci and Catti are the Cherusci, who, for want of an enemy long cherished a too lasting and enfeebling peace, a state more flattering than secure, since the repose enjoyed amidst ambitions and powerful neighbors is treacherous, and when an appeal is made to the sword, moderation and probity are names appropriated by the victors. Thus the Cherusci, who formerly bore the titles of just and upright, are now charged with cowardice and folly, and the good fortune of the Catti who subdued them has grown into wisdom. The ruin of the Cherusci involved that of Foci, a neighboring tribe, equal partakers of their adversary, although they had enjoyed an inferior share of the prosperity. In the same quarter of Germany adjacent to the ocean dwelled the Cimbri, a small state at present, but great in renown. Of their past grandeur extensive vestiges still remain, in encampments and lines on either shore, from the compass of which the strength and numbers of the nation may still be found, and credit derived from the account of so prestigious an army. It was in the 640th year of Rome that the arms of the Cimbri were first heard of, under the consuls Caecilius, Metellus, and Papirius Carbo, from which era to the second consulate of the Emperor Trajan in 195 is a period of nearly 210 years. So long as Germany withstood the might of Rome. During this long interval, many mutual wounds have been inflicted. Not the Samnite, the Carthaginian, Spanish, Gaul, or Parthian had given more frequent alarms, for the liberty of the Germans is more vigorous than the monarchy of Arsacidae. What is the East, which has itself lost Pacorus and suffered an overthrow from Ventidius, to boast against us, but the slaughter of Crassus? But the Germans, by the defeat or capture of Carbo, Cassius, Scaurus Aurelius, Servilius Caepo, Gnaeus Manlius, deprived the Roman people of 5 consular armies, and afterwards took from Augustus himself Varus with 3 legions. Nor did Gaius Marius in Italy, the deified Julius in Gaul, or Drusus, Nero, Germanicus in their own country, defeat then without loss. The subsequent mighty threats of Caligula terminated in ridicule. Then succeeded tranquillity, till, seizing the occasion of our discords and civil wars, they forced the winter quarters of the legions, and even aimed at the possession of Gaul, and again expelled thence. They have in latter times been triumphed over, and then vanquished. We have now to speak of the Suevi, who do not compromise a single state like the Catti or the Tencteri, but occupy the greatest part of Germany, and are still distributed into different names and nations, although all hearing the common appellation of Suevi. It is a characteristic of these people to turn their hair sideways and tie it beneath the poll in a knot. By this mark, the Suevi are distinguished from the rest of the Germans, and the free men of the Suevi from slaves. Among other nations, this mode, either on account of some relationship with the Suevi or from the usual propensity to imitation, is sometimes adopted, but rarely, and only during the period of youth. The Suevi, even till they are hoary, continue to have their hair growing stiffly backwards, and often it is fastened on the very crown of the head. The chiefs dress with it with still greater care, and in this respect they study ornament, though an unabasing kind. For their design is not to make love or inspire it. They decorate themselves in this manner as they proceed to war, in order to seem taller and more terrible, and dress for the eyes of their enemies. The Semnones assert themselves to be the most ancient and noble of the Suevi, and their pretensions are confirmed by religion. At a stated time, all the people of the same lineage assembled by their delegates in a wood, consecrated by the auguries of their forefathers and ancient terror, and thereby public slaughter of a human victim, celebrate the horrid origin of their barbarous rites. Another kind of reverence is paid to the grove. No person enters it without being bound by a chain, as an acknowledgment of his inferior nature and the power of the deity residing there. If he accidentally fall, it is not lawful for him to be lifted or to rise up. They roll themselves out along the ground. The whole of their superstition has this import, that from this spot the nation derives its origin, that here is the residence of the deity, the governor of all, and that everything else is subject and subordinate to him. These opinions receive additional authority from the power of the Semnones, who inhabit 100 cantons, and from the great body they compose consider themselves as the head of the Suevi. The Langobardi, on the other hand, are ennobled by the smallest of their numbers, since though surrounded by powerful nations, they derive security not from obsequiousness, but from their martial enterprise. The neighboring Rudigni and the Avions, Angli, Varini, Edosus, Suardones, Nuithones are defended by rivers or forests. Nothing remarkable occurs in any of these, except that they unite in the worship of Hertha, and suppose her to interfere in the affairs of men and to visit the different nations. In an island of the ocean stands a sacred, unviolated grove, in which a consecrated chariot covered with a veil, which the priest alone is permitted to touch. He becomes conscious of the entrance of the goddess into his sacred recess, and with profound veneration awaits the vehicle, which is drawn by yoked cows. At this season, all is joy, and every place which the goddess designs to visit a scene of festivity. No wars are undertaken, arms are untouched, and every hostile weapon is shut up. Peace abroad and at home are then only known, and only loved, till at length the same priest reconducts the goddess, satiated with mortal intercourse, to her temple. The chariot, with its curtain, and, if we may believe it, the goddess herself, then undergo ablution in a secret lake. This office is performed by slaves, whom the same lake instantly swallows up. Hence proceeds a mysterious horror, and a holy ignorance of what that can be, which is beheld only by those who are about to perish. This part of the Suevian nation extends the most remote recesses of Germany. If we now follow the course of the Danube, as we did that of the Rhine, we must first meet with the Hermunduri, a people faithful to the Romans, and on that account the only Germans who are admitted to commerce, not on the bank alone, but within our territories and in the flourishing colony established in the province of Rhaetia. They pass and repass at pleasure, without being attended by a guard, and while we exhibit other nations our arms and camps alone, to these we lay open our houses and country seats, which they behold without coveting. In the country of the Hermunduri rises the Elbe, a river formerly celebrated and known among us, now only heard of by name. Contiguous to the Hermunduri are the Narisci, and next to them the Marcomanni and Cuadi. Of these, the Marcomanni are the most powerful and renowned, and have even acquired the country which they inhabit by their valor in expelling the Boii. Nor are the Narsci and Cuadi inferior in bravery, and this is, as it were, the van of Germany as far as it was bordered by the Danube. Within our memory, the Marcomanni and Cuadi were governed by kings of their own nation, of the noble line of Marodobus and Tudrus. They now submit even to foreigners, but all the power of their kings depends upon the authority of the Romans. We seldom assist them with our arms, but frequently with our money, nor are they less potent on that account. Behind these are the Marsigni, Gotini, Osi, and Buri, who close the rear of the Marcomanni and Cuadi. Of these, the Marsigni and Buri in language and dress resemble the Suevi. the Gothini and Ossi prove themselves not to be Germans, the first by their use of Gallic, the second of the Pannonian tongue, and both by their submitting to pay tribute, which is levied on them, as aliens, partly by the Sarmatians, partly by the Coati. The Gothini, to their additional disgrace, work iron mines. All these people inhabit but a small proportion of a champaign country. Their settlements are chiefly among forts, and on the sides of the summits and mountains, for a continued ridge of mountains separates Suevia from various remoter tribes. Of these, the Lygian is the most extensive, and diffuses its name through several communities. It will be sufficient to name the most powerful of them: the Ari, Helvecones, Manimi, Elisi, and Naharvali. In the country of the latter is a grove, consecrated to religious rites of great antiquity. A priest presides over them, dressed in women's apparel, but the gods worshipped there are said, according to the Roman interpretation, to be Castor and Pollux. Their attributes are the same. Their name, Alcis. No images, indeed, or vestiges of foreign superstition appear in their worship, but they are revered under the character of young men and brothers. The Ari, fierce beyond the superiority of strength they possess over the other just enumerated people, improve their natural ferocity of aspect by artificial aid. The shields are black. Their bodies are painted. They choose the darkest nights for an attack, and strike terror by the funeral gloom of their sable bands, no enemy being able to sustain their singular and, as it were, infernal appearance, since every combat the eyes of the first part subdued. Beyond the Ligi are the Gothones, who live under a monarchy, somewhat more strict than the other of the German nations, yet not to a degree comparable with liberty. Adjoining to these are the Rugi and Lemovi, situated on the sea coast. All these tribes are distinguished by round shields, short swords, and submission to regal authority. Next occur the communities of the Suiones, seated in the very ocean, who besides their strength in men and arms, also possess a naval force. The form of their vessels differs from ours in having a prow at each end, so that they are always ready to advance. They make no use of sails, nor have regular benches of oars at the sides. They row, as practiced in some rivers, without order, sometimes on one side, sometimes on the other, as occasion requires. These people honor wealth, for which they reason are subject to monarchical government, without any limitations or precautions against conditions of allegiance. Nor are arms allowed to be kept promiscuously, as among the other German nations, but are committed by the charge of a keeper, and he to a slave. The pretext is that the ocean defends them from any sudden incursions, and men unemployed with arms in their hands readily became licentious. In fact, it is for the king's interest not to entrust a noble, a freedman, or even an emancipated slave with the custody of arms. Beyond the Suiones is another sea, sluggish and almost stagnant, by which the whole globe is imagined to be girt and enclosed. From this circumstance that the last light of the setting sun continues so vivid till its rising as to obscure the stars. Popular belief adds that the sound of this emerging from the ocean is also heard, and forms of deities, rays beaming from his head, are beheld. Only thus far, report says, truly does nature extend. On the right shore of the Suevic Sea dwell the tribes of the Aesti, whose dress and customs are the same with those of the Suevi, but their language more resembles the British. They worship the mother of the gods, and as the symbol of their superstition they carry about them the figures of wild boars. This serves them in place of armor, and every other defense. It renders the votary of the goddess safe even among the midst of foes. Their weapons are chiefly clubs, iron being little used among them. They cultivate corn and other fruits of the earth with more industry than German indolence commonly exerts. They even explore the sea, and are the only people who gather amber, which by them is called glace, and is collected among the shallows upon the shore. With the usual indifference of barbarians, they have not inquired or ascertained from what natural object or by what means it is produced. It long lay disregarded amidst the other things thrown up by the sea, till our luxury gave it a name. Useless to them, they gather it in the rough, bring it unwrought, and wonder at the price that they would receive for it. It would appear, however, to be an exudation from certain trees, since reptiles, even winged animals, are often seen shining through it, which, entangled in it while in liquid state, became enclosed as it hardened. I should therefore imagine that, as the luxuriant woods and groves in the secret recesses of the East exude frankincense and balsam, there are so the same in the islands, continents of the West, which, acted upon by the near rays of the sun, drop their liquid juices into the subjacent sea, whence, by the force of the tempests, they are thrown out upon the opposite coasts. If the nature of amber be examined by the application of fire, it kindles like a torch, with a thick and odorous flame, and presently revolves into a glutinous manner resembling pitch or resin. The several communities of the Cetones succeed those of the Suiones, to whom they are similar in other respects, but differ in submitting to a female reign. So far they have degenerated not only from liberty, but even from slavery. Here Suevia terminates. I am in doubt whether to reckon the Peruchini, Veneti, and Feni among the Germans or Sarmatians, although the Pircuni, who are by some called the Bastarnae, agree with the Germans in language, apparel, and habitations. All of them live in filth and laziness. Their intermarriages of their chiefs with the Sarmatians have debased them by a mixture of manners of that people. The Veneti have drawn much from this source, for they overrun in their predatory excursions all the woody and mountainous tracts between the Pircuni and Feni. Yet even these are rather to be referred to the Germans, since they build houses, carry shields, and travel with speed on foot, all of which particulars they took differ from the Sarmatians, who pass their time in wagons and on horseback. The Feni live in a state of amazing savageness and squalid poverty. They are destitute of arms and settled abodes. Their food is herbs, their clothing, skins, their bed, the ground. Their only dependence is on their arrows, which for want of iron are headed with bone. And the chase is the support of the women as well as the men. The former accompany the latter in the pursuit and claim a share of the prey. Nor do they provide any shelter for their infants from wild beasts and storms. then a covering of branches twisted together. This is the resort of youth. This is the receptacle of old age. Yet even this way of life is their estimation happier than groaning all over the plough, toiling in the erection of houses, subjecting their own fortunes and those of others to the agitations of alternate hope and fear. Secure against men, secure against the gods, they have attained the most difficult point, not to need even a wish. All our further accounts are intermixed with fable, as that the Helusi and Oxione have human faces with bodies and limbs of wild beasts. These unauthenticated reports I shall leave untouched. End of the account from Tacitus. Well, that was a long one, wasn't it? I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. What did you learn about the Germans? Do you think they're the same as our modern-day Germans? Perhaps a few differences nowadays. Now, before we go, I would like to thank my top-tier patrons and supporters. Dark, Gary, Kimberly, Ember, Ben, Britt, Charles, Aaron, James, Jeffrey, Melissa, Scott, Stark Factory, Wendy, Jaden, Sherry, Jessica, Christine, Sally, Katiana, and Christine. There are 2 Christines now. I hope that they can tell each other apart. And thank you very much for listening this far. If you've enjoyed it, why not subscribe to the channel? Why not tell your friends about it? Why not tell your entire family, your workplace, everybody you know? Perhaps I'm being a little selfish. Well, as long as you enjoyed it, that's fine. Good night, everyone. Lots of love to you all. Let's get a good rest.